And with your permission, I'm going to go ahead and read this statement, and then I'll pass it back over to you to open the meeting and read the legal statement.
Okay.
Okay. Good morning, board, staff, and members of the public. After my statement, the chairman will open this meeting and explain the rules for the electronic meeting. Please keep your microphone on mute when you're not speaking. The technical support team may proactively mute participants if the microphone is picking up background noise. Board members should check to make sure the microphone is not muted before speaking. You may text me at any time during the meeting, 540-336-3948. If you need technical support, and an IT tech will call your cell to assist. I now turn the meeting over to Chairman Allen.
Thank you, Jewel. I call the meeting to order and have to read the legal statement. In accordance with the Governor's State of Emergency Declaration and executive orders regarding the COVID-19 pandemic, the Loudoun County Board of Supervisors continuing ordinance and General Assembly 2020 budget amendments 28 and 137. Loudoun Water will meet today in an electronic meeting. In compliance with these special procedures, only action items necessary to continue operations of Loudoun Water and the discharge of its lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities will be discussed during today's meeting. Reports and other meeting information are available on board docs. Public notice and meeting access information was provided on the Loudoun Water Board website. A recording of the meeting will be available in board docs at the following link, which is basically www.boarddocs.com, VA, Loudoun Water VA Board. Board members wishing to speak are reminded to press unmute. It is recommended to show video or use the hand raise feature when making comments to allow staff to accurately capture comments. All items will be recommended to the September 10th, 2020 board meeting. With that, I need a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
I'll second.
Okay. All those in favor?
I'll take a roll call vote, sir.
Okay.
Mr. Allen,
Aye.
Mr. Byers,
Aye.
Mr. Campbell,
Aye.
Mr. Kelly,
Aye.
and I'd also like to acknowledge that Mr. Moody has joined the meeting.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Thank you. Morning.
Okay, the first item on the action agenda is approval of the financial advisory services contract by Mr. Carnes.
Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see you all again. So the first item is the approval of the financial advisory services contract. As you all know, we have a long working relationship with Davenport and Company. We've been writing a contract that they have with Montgomery County, Virginia for the past few years. And that contract actually expired earlier this summer. And we've been operating on a month-to-month basis until we could get back before you. Montgomery County had the option to extend the contract, and they did renew it, and it goes through May 14th of 2021. You can see the details of that contract on your screen. There's no annual retainer fee. Any fees for any debt issuance will be agreed upon in advance. And if we have a need for any special projects, those fees will also be determined in advance of that project. So we would like to extend the contract. In addition, staff would also like your feedback on how to proceed forward with our financial advisory services. As I mentioned, this contract expires in May of next year. Montgomery County does have the option of 3 one-year renewals available to them. So that kind of leaves us at their whim of whether they'll extend their contract or not. So we would like your feedback on whether we should take the opportunity between now and May of next year to try to identify another contract that we could ride with maybe an additional longer contract term, or we could also issue a request for proposals and find our own contract for financial advisory services. Either way, we would look for contract terms that have no annual retainer fee, just as you can see on your screen with our current contract. So I'm open to all questions and any feedback that you have.
Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, I have a question, Brian. What would be the benefit if we went and tried to find someone ourselves, or would there be a benefit?
The only benefit really would be that we wouldn't have to come before you every year and ask for renewal, and we would know that we have a contract in place. Like I said, the current contract does have 3 one-year renewal options, but we just aren't sure whether Montgomery County will definitely renew every year or not.
Okay, so it's just really this right here, bringing a presentation before the board. That's really all that's saving us.
Correct. We would keep the same. We would look for the same contract terms. No retainer fee. All fees for debt issuance and special projects are in advance. So it would be the same terms. It would just be we would look to lock in for a longer period than 1 year.
Are you satisfied with Davenport and their role for us, or would you be looking for somebody different?
We're satisfied. We've been satisfied. There's no desire for us to change firms, so that would not be the driver to go out to bid. No.
Okay. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? I personally don't have a problem either way. I would leave it up to you, to the finance staff, because if you want to get a long-term contract so we don't have to keep doing this every year, I'm fine with that. And if you want to come back and keep riding Montgomery County's coattails, it seems reasonable. It takes us 5 minutes to approve this. It seems pretty administerial. So I'm fine either way.
Thank you.
So I'm fine with putting this on consent. I think we've done that in the past. Does anyone disagree with that? And we can vote on it right now.
I'll move to put it on consent.
I'll second it.
Okay,
Yeah.
vote.
Take a roll call vote. Mr. Allen,
Aye.
Mr. Byers,
Aye.
Mr. Campbell,
Aye.
and Mr. Kelly.
Aye.
Unanimous. Thank you, sir.
Okay. The next item on the list is the approval of the audit services contract. Mr. Carnes again.
Thank you. Just one note before I begin this one. This item would typically run through the audit committee, but rather than schedule a special meeting with the audit committee, we received approval from the audit committee chair to present this item to you this morning. So our auditing services contract expired at the end of the 2019 audit. And so in March, we issued a request for proposal for auditing services. In April, we received 7 bids. A independent committee of 3 staff members reviewed those bids. The top 3 firms were Yount Hyde Barbour, PB Mayers, and Cherry Beckert. The 3 members unanimously had Yount Hyde Barbour as the top ranked firm, and we entered negotiations with them. The contract period would be for an initial 5 years with the option to renew for 2 one-year renewals. You can see the pricing for the first 5 years. They range from just under $72,000 to just under $78,000. And that includes all fees for year-end audit work, if we have any single audit work that's required, as well as any technical reports that we need. If we have a desire to have YHB do any special projects, those fees would be agreed upon in advance. And we did have YHB do a special project for us under our previous contract, and that was for construction contract review for the Potomac Water Supply program. So my ask of you is that we approve the auditing services contract for YHB for the initial 5-year period. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Byers
Ryan,
has his
I had a
hand up.
question.
Oh,
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering, all 3 of those firms are excellent firms.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any, I wouldn't call it an advantage, but is there any desire to change auditing firms to get a fresh set of eyes on Loudon Water? I know sometimes that's a good idea, sometimes it's not a good idea. I just wondered if that was ever discussed.
It was discussed, but what we've seen in the kind of governmental sector here is that most firms do kind of stick with their auditing firms, and YHB rotates really well their staff members in and out of the audit. we usually have at least one or two fresh faces every year that look at our financials. So we feel confident that they have at least a rotation of folks. And that was a request in the proposals, was that if we asked that they have the staff ability to rotate members in and out. So it's not the same folks every year.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
I had Brian, I had the same question. Bankers thinking alike again.
Yeah, I hate that.
It was more, I know, it was more of a best practice. I have no problems at all with Yount Hyde Barbour. In fact, I think they're excellent. I think their work is phenomenal. It was just sort of is there a best practice to change horses every once in a while just to get a fresh set of eyes? But you answered that satisfactorily, so I'm fine. And I'll move approval to award the auditing services contract to Yount Hyde Barbour.
I have a question.
I will second.
I have a question, Brian. You said that the top ranked was Yount Hyde Barbour. How do you guys determine whether they're a higher ranking than PB Mars?
So we had a couple items that we scored on, the methodology, the scope, the technology, and we went through and we scored kind of each section. One had a total of 40 and another 20. And so we went through and independently reviewed each proposal, and you get to a number somewhere between 100 and 0, basically, for each firm. And then independently, our procurement tech takes all the evaluations and looks at them and says, these are the top 3 based on the scores. And then YHB was about nine points higher than PB Mares and Cherry Bekaert. So it was a pretty substantial spread.
All right. And then I have a follow-up question too. So, we have these quotes for services here for 5 years running out. Did we get quotes from the other firms at this level of detail, or do they not make it to the process where they can provide quotes? So what I'm digging at is one of these other firms, $10,000 cheaper each year?
So since we didn't get to that level, we didn't ask for the pricing yet. They share their pricing for their references, and these are competitive. Nobody else's references jumped out as we would be getting a substantial decrease in price if we went with anyone else. No.
Okay. Does anyone else have any questions? All right, we had a motion and it was second. I'm sorry,
Mr. Byers, your hand is still up. Do you have another question, or was it up from the last question?
No, I'm going to lower my hand. Sorry about that.
That's okay. I just wanted to make sure we got your questions if you had another one. Thank you.
Okay, so I had a motion and a second. We do need to do a roll call.
Yes, sir. Mr. Allen?
Aye.
Mr. Byers?
Aye.
Mr. Campbell?
Aye.
And Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Unanimous. Thank you, sir.
And can we put this on consent as well?
Yes, I have it on consent. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Proposal to change the procurement policy, by Ms. Bevins.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Allen, and to the entire Finance Committee. It's great to see all of you guys. My name is Amy Bevins. I'm the Loudoun Water Procurement Manager. The purpose of today's item is to seek approval of the proposed changes to the Loudoun Water Procurement Policy. The procurement of goods, services, insurance, and construction, along with the procedures for the disposal of surplus property, must be conducted in accordance with the Code of Virginia, Section 2.2 4300, the Virginia Public Procurement Act, also known as the VPPA. A link to the VPPA was provided in your write-up for your reference. The board adopted purchasing policies and procedures in 1983 to ensure compliance with the VPPA. The policy has been revised several times over the years to the current policy. Pending board approval, the Loudon Water Procurement Policy, revised to be effective October 1st, 2020, sets forth the policies to be followed by Loudon Water staff in fulfilling procurement responsibilities within their delegated limits. It is my responsibility to monitor the policy and seek board approval for policy changes as legislative and administrative changes take place. Here we go. The following legislative changes were made to the Code of Virginia effective July 1st, 2020. The VPPA requires Loudon Water to adopt procedures related to these sections, furthermore requiring us to revise the policy to incorporate the changes. Section 2.24303 increases the maximum permissible aggregate or sum of all phases for goods, services, and non-transportation related construction that may be procured without requiring competitive sealed bids or competitive negotiation for single or term contracts from $100,000 to $200,000. The procurement policy reflects this change within the procedure section. It's on pages 4 and 5. And on page 7, the summary of procurement policies. VPPA section 2.24310 adds sexual orientation and gender identity to the list of prohibited discrimination classes. And 2.24343.1 adds sexual orientation, gender identity to the list of prohibited discrimination classes for permitted contracts with certain religious organizations, purpose, and limitations. You'll find these changes on page 21 of the procurement policy. And VPPA 2.24382 modifies language to allow local public bodies to utilize construction management on projects less than $26 million, provided that the project is complex and the procurement method is approved by the agency's governing body, our board. And this change can be found on page 11. So before I proceed to the administrative changes, do you have any questions about the legislative changes that have taken place?
Anyone have any questions? I have a couple if nobody has any.
Sure.
This is a little bit confusing to me. I'm not a contracts person, so I apologize if some of my questions are less than intellectual, but is it correct to say that the VPPA is not meant to talk about professional services? And if so, are we applying these limits in a different category, meaning professional services, that's not necessarily specific to the Procurement Policy Act from Virginia? Is that true, or am I missing something?
So the items that we're discussing, sorry. Here we go. So the items that we're discussing right now are strictly the legislative changes. We do have other changes in my request today that are administrative changes.
Okay.
So the and actually we do have a correction that is related to professional services. So in the VPPA, when they speak about formal procurements, whether it's an informal or a formal solicitation, that's where we get into the competitive sealed bids or the competitive negotiations. For the goods, services, and non-transportation related construction, which is most of our construction, they have increased that competitive limit from 100 to 200. For competitive negotiation for professional services, that formal limit is $80,000.
Okay, so in other words, if you had a construction management contract that was $150,000, that would not apply to these new legislative changes.
I see Carla has her hand raised. I don't know if she wants to jump in here before I.
Good morning.
Hey, Carla.
To answer your question, Mr. Allen, so yes, when we get to the administrative changes, we are kind of mixing two things together in that the board's policy right now is construction and professional services. go to the board for approval. The limit that's been set right now is 100,000. And we've just tied that back to this first legislative section that Amy's referencing. I think more for ease of being able to point to something, and it seems to be consistent with what others have their boards approve. So you are correct. I mean, the legislative change does not address professional services, but that is an item that we take to the board for approval. So we've set the limit to be the same for those two items. I think that's what you're getting to. But yes, I mean, the VPPA obviously addresses professional services, but from an administrative standpoint, we're using this as the guide, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and then to follow up on what you just told me, so does the VP, it's impossible to read this whole policy, it's so long, but does the VPPA have a policy on professional services? And do they have a cap on it? And if so, what is it?
Well, as Amy mentioned, to not, I'm going to say this wrong, it's $80,000 to not have to go through the competitive negotiation phase. You can set, it doesn't set for you what the board has to approve. It just simply says, this is the process by which you're going to procure professional services. On the administrative side, you decide what the board approves and at what limits.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
So in the past, VPPA has allowed an $80,000 max, and we have allowed 100,000. And now we're going to allow 200,000, even though VPA is still only allowing 80,000 for professional services. Is that true?
No, we're not going to allow professional services to not be competitively negotiated if they exceed 80,000.
Okay.
80,000 to 200,000, that I would approve that if the board approves the administrative change. In other words, we still have to follow the VPPA process. They're not setting board approval limits. That's what you're doing. Does that make sense?
Kind of. So if it's a competitive process, this doesn't apply.
That's correct. You handle, well, procurement requirements, how you procure, how you're going to get the services. That's what's laid out in VPPA. How those are approved is up to the board. Okay.
Okay.
It doesn't say in the VPPA that the legislative or the governing body must approve all contracts greater than 100,000 or 200,000. That's up to you.
All right. I see Mr. Kelly had his hand raised.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. What does it mean by non-transportation related construction? I didn't understand that term.
Well, basically non-VDOT projects. So
Okay.
those are construction, right? Any construction we do.
It's nothing to do with,
right.
So it's an actual project that's transportation related. It's not transferring goods to a construction site or something like that. It's
exactly, yeah.
Okay.
No, those transportation projects, they kind of have their own.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone else have any questions? Mr. Koblos?
Yeah, I have a question. So if something is competitively bid, does it come before the board, or how does that work? Because I'm reading there that there's this trigger about it, whether I'm sorry, I'm talking about professional services, and there's the qualifier competitive negotiation is not required. So what happens if it is required? Does that mean it automatically comes before us, or is that something that doesn't necessarily need to come before the board?
Does not necessarily need to come before the board. Again, I think I think the key is separating legislative requirements that lay out the process by which you procure. The other side of that is once you've done that, how does that final contract get approved? Is it by the board or is it by the GM or the other limits that we've set?
So what's our policy for our organization in an instance like that?
Your board policy is that any construction or professional services greater than 100,000 must go to the board for approval. Or if there are change orders that would put that project or service over 100,000, that has to come back to you as well.
Okay, regardless of whether it's competitively bid or not.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay, that's helpful. Are there any examples of projects or people we hired last year that would, let's say it's 150,000 or 125 or 180 that if we raised the limit would be examples of things that did come to the board but wouldn't have come to the board under a new policy? Do you have any examples like that?
Amy, do you have specific examples or
Sure.
maybe-
So
stats on that?
if we're talking strictly just professional services, most of our standalone professional service agreements, these are going to be your non-task order related, larger design projects. Those are typically going to be more than $100,000 or $200,000. So those would always come to the CIP or the board, for approval. For most of our professional service agreements that we bring to the board for approval are task orders under our BOA. And so when we start looking at what we bring to the board, currently over $100,000, I went back to 2011, so I went back 9 years, and of 552 task orders, we had 38 that were in the range of 100 and 200,000. So that averaged to about 4 a year. And then I looked at, there was 470 task orders that were less than 100,000. So, and we had 44 that were greater than 200,000. So of the majority of our professional service agreements, again, most of those are task order related under our BOAs, and the majority of them fall under $100,000. Does that help at all?
Yeah, and thank you for looking that up. Are you able to share any of those specifics? What did you say it was, 30 something or 40 something? I'm sorry.
There was 38 that was in the
38.
range of 100 to 200,000, and then I also looked at the construction. So as we get into our administrative changes here, when we're asking for the increase in construction from 100 to 200, I could only find one contract back from 2017 that fell in that range between 100 and 200,000, and that was the Evergreen Septage receiving station, the electrical improvement projects. It was slightly over 100,000, and we had brought that to the board for approval.
Okay.
I can provide some examples. Hang on one second here.
Yeah, great. Yeah, just speaking for myself, I mean, I think that might be helpful for the board, because if we look at it and we go, hey, none of these are that big of a deal to us,
Right.
they're ministerial. I think it'd probably be not a big deal to raise the limit, but if there are things where we go, hey, I'd actually like to have been involved in that, or
Sure.
I thought that was good, you know what I'm saying there.
Yep. So I did look at some active task orders that we have that fell in the range between 100 and 200. So some examples would be groundwater monitoring program. The Howardsville collection system design was 172,000. Construction phase engineering services for the Beacon Hill water treatment plant and well upgrade.
Mm-hmm.
I believe we're still in a study here, but the JLMA, the water and wastewater utility plan, phase 2, was 115,100.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other task orders that were older, that fell in that range, they're really old. I mean, they go back to actually the start date of 2004, 2005. Two that came up from 2011 were reuse, main design, and permitting, and a preliminary engineering report for vehicle access to the water treatment plant. Those were slightly under 200,000, but most of them are old.
Yeah. And it was 38, you said, over a period of several years. It's not just 38 from just like 2019.
Correct. Yeah. And even just looking back to the last 4 years, we had 11 task orders.
Okay. So we're either way, we're not talking about a significant amount of work here.
Correct. And again, these are all task order related.
Yeah.
So if we were to do an RFP for, let's say, a big pump station design, or, you know, those would be well over $200,000.
Sure. Okay, thank you. That's very helpful for me.
Sure. Yes, sir.
Mr. Kobliss has his hand up.
Go ahead.
Oh, I had to make sure my microphone is on. So I have a little bit of an issue on this one. I understand construction, $200,000 is peanuts for construction, but over $100,000 for professional services is a lot of money. And my worry is the way we split it up. We have the design services, and then we have construction management services. So that would mean that we would never be able to comment on the construction management services or the construction administration services, because a lot of those are less than $200,000. And with what's been going on lately with the shop drawings and those kind of things where we're getting extras, huge amounts for shop drawings, we would not be able to comment on any of those. So with the construction part, I don't have any problem, but the issue with with professional services is a whole different bailiwick. I just and I'm comfortable that if it was one contract, it would be if it was one contract for the architect, it would be well over $200,000 on these things. But the way we split it up, we have the construction management part as less as partial of it, and I don't know. It just doesn't. I don't like to micromanage, but it just seems like we've been having in my opinion, we've been having issues with these construction management contracts lately. Anyway, that's all I got.
My recommendation would be that when we get to, when Amy finishes the presentation and we get to the motion, we make any proposed changes to the action that you want to have. These legislative changes, they're they are what they are, so they're going to be incorporated. So that wouldn't be part of the action.
Okay, so we're going to get on. Okay.
Okay, so our administrative changes. 1 second. Here we go. So I'm also seeking approval for the following administrative changes. On page 6 of our current policy, it states that the board will approve all construction and professional service contracts for $100,000 or more, and any amendment to a construction or professional services contract, which would cause a contract to be or exceed $100,000, or which is an amount greater than 25% of the existing contract price, or $50,000. So that is our current policy. This policy has been consistent with the VPPA limits for procurements that do not require competitive sealed bids or competitive negotiations. With the legislative increase for the formal construction procurements to $200,000, I'm recommending a corresponding change to the current policy for approvals, increasing board approval from $100,000 to $200,000 on construction and professional service contracts. It would be helpful if you do have the red line policy up, if you can refer to page 7. And when we take this to the board, I can certainly include this in the presentation so it's a visual. but it does lay out our summary of procurement policies, and it does show the procurement type and the thresholds and the approval limits to include the board approval limits. So do we want to have another conversation here, or do you want to wait until we get the only other slide that I have for this presentation is to make a correction to our procurement policy to reflect the $80,000 professional service competitive negotiation amount.
Amy, go ahead and show that slide too, I think, and then
Sure.
we'll just come full circle.
Okay. So this is all I have for the presentation, and you'll see, just to note within the updates of the red line policy, we also made some administrative. When I say administrative changes, it's really cleanup within the policy related to the design, build, and construction management procedures. This was revisions to the definitions, eliminating language that didn't have any reference to the code or to the Secretary of Administration procedures, and adding in any missing language. So you see a lot of red lines there in the design, build, and construction management, but it really is simply cleanup. The only major change that came out of the Secretary of Administration procedures this year was the increase for construction management projects. The construction value increased from $10 million to $26 million. But again, those are not related to the VPPA changes. We just see those as administrative changes to clean up those procedures.
Okay, thank you. So it sounds like there's a little bit of pushback on raising the limit from 100 to 200. Do we want to just have another presentation with the full board in September so that other people, I mean, I'd like more people that are on the CIP committee. Obviously, this seems more CIP oriented because of the construction management contracts. So obviously they need to hear this as well. So is there any action that we have to do on this today?
There's no required action. I mean, typically we try to take some recommendation from this committee to the board and then allow them to, weigh in on the final action. I mean, one thing that you can consider doing is if there is more pushback on that professional services side, and also because it doesn't tie directly to that 200, you could split your approval policy as well. And you could keep your professional services at 100 and then have your construction at 200. With the same caveat that if anything comes along that pushes, the contract over 100 or 200, depending on what it's for, it comes back to you. That's just one idea, but are you required to act on it today? No. I mean, typically you take a recommendation. It's completely up to you how you want to handle that.
Well, I mean, I like that recommendation personally. We can take a straw poll. And as Ms. Bevins said, it's only 4 contracts a year. So it doesn't seem like, it would streamline operations at Loudon Water to somehow eliminate these 4 a year. So maybe it's better to have a split proposal where we stay at $200,000 for non-professional services and stay at 100, or go to 200,000 and stay at 100,000. Can we take a straw poll and see if people agree with that?
Well, I guess one way to do it, Mr. Allen, I mean, we can do a straw poll too. I mean, if someone wants to make that motion, and then you can kind of vote and then take it from there. That might be a little cleaner way to do it.
Okay. Does anyone want to make a motion?
Well, first of all, I think Carla's idea is a great idea. Like I said before, construction 200,000 is peanuts.
That sounds like a motion.
Unfortunately, Mr. Gobles is not on the committee, so.
Right.
Oh, that's right.
Oh.
Okay, does anyone want to make a motion where we split the approval, still staying at 100,000 for professional services and going to $200,000 for the non-professional services?
Yeah, I'll make that motion.
I would second it.
Any discussion?
The only thing I just, I'm looking at this red line here. I've got the doc up. Is this motion, which is kind of vague, is that sufficient, staff, or does there need to be more specificity in this motion?
Well, we will clean up the motion, if you will. I mean, we'll clean up what your recommendation is. So we will take that approval section and redline it, I guess,
Okay.
in preparation for the board meeting. So it will not be vague. It will be whatever the approval should be once you approve, once it goes through the board, it should read that way. So that's what we'll prepare for the board meeting.
Okay, so we have a motion that was seconded. Let's take a vote.
Okay, Mr. Allen,
Aye.
Mr. Byers,
Aye.
Mr. Campbell,
Aye.
Mr. Kelly.
Aye.
Unanimous to split that, and as Carla said, staff will clean up the motion and bring that back in September. Mr. Allen, did you want that on action or consent, sir?
Let's put that on action.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks, Amy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amy.
Next agenda item is the 5-year financing plan by Mr. Carnes.
Okay, good morning again. So this item is the 5-year plan of finance for the years 2020 through 2024. So this is a slide you've all seen before, but really it just shows how we take all the inputs and how we get our 5-year plan. The capital spending plan and the CIP are really the big drivers for any debt issuance that we might need in that 5-year window. And then the operating budget and the rates are really the drivers for whether we meet our debt service coverage or not. So just some highlights. The 5-year period from 2020 through 2024 for this window compared to the 5-year plan last year for the same time period, we had an additional $43 million in CIP expenses. And that was really driven by 3 projects: DC water improvements, the Broad Run liquids treatment expansion, and the Milestone Reservoir. And the DC water improvements are really driven by, they're doing a lot of work on the Potomac Interceptor in the next few years. And so we saw a large increase in the expected expenses for that. Growth, our ERCs remain consistent with what the county has put out in their most recent projections. And we use the revenue and expense projections from the last rate study that was completed in 2018. So the 5-year plan, it's currently showing a $20 million debt issuance in 2023. When you compare it to last year's plan in the spring of 2019, that plan actually called for a $50 million debt issuance in 2021 and an additional $20 million debt issuance in 2022. The $50 million debt issuance has been completely removed from the plan, and that's really a result of 2 things. Number one is we saw a large increase in availability charges last year. We actually got almost an additional $28 million in revenue above our projections. And then historically, we underspend our operating budget and capital spending plan. So additional revenue and less expenses resulted in that $50 million going away. And then the $20 million was pushed out an additional year. And then our cash levels, you'll notice that we make sure we maintain above the 2 times cash flow at all times throughout the 5-year period. And that's why we're currently seeing a $20 million debt issuance in 2023. Looks like I have a question. Yes, Mr. Kobelis.
Yeah, just real quick question. Do we have the additional sewage treatment facilities that we talked about yesterday in the JLMA in this 5-year plan of finance? Just curious.
So no, not at this time. That would show up in the next 5-year plan when we come back to you in the spring. Yeah. Mr. Byers?
Bill, I think your microphone is muted.
Sorry about that. You have the 20 million debt issuance in 2023, but in 2024, the debt service doesn't really change much. Is that a result of interest rates? Am I reading that wrong?
Yeah, it's interest rates. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, that's pretty good that you can issue 20 million and the debt service stays the same. That's a good deal.
Any other questions?
Yeah, one more question for you, Brian. Is there anything else that's COVID related that you feel like we should be thinking of? I know it's a strange thing. It's hard to predict the future, but are we thinking about that? I'm sure you are. Is there anything else that we should be setting aside to cover losses or people not paying on time or things of this nature?
Sure. So part of the plan, what we did was, normally we bring this plan to you in the spring, and so we use all of our budget numbers for the year. And so since we're bringing it to you now in August, we went through our mid-year review before we actually completed this 5-year plan. And so then we took a conservative estimate also on how much of the cash we actually think we will get from the revenue that we're actually billing. So we did decrease, to be conservative, to just to see what would happen. And we're pretty well suited right now. I think I have some numbers here actually. We currently have 571 customers that have called and set up payment plans with us for past due balances. And we sent out somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 reminder notices in late July to folks who have not paid their bills yet. And we've seen 57% decrease in delinquent accounts since that time. So I think we're doing a good job of trying to catch up with folks before they get too far behind. We currently have about $500,000 in past due accounts, which is more than we're used to, but is not substantial in our total revenue. It's less than 1%. It's about 0.5%. So we're doing what we can, and I think we're pretty well suited, at least for now.
Are those accounts that are in arrears, is that really our only concern? We're not concerned that we're not going to get reimbursed from other contractors, developers, or things like that?
Not right now, no.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Kelly has his hand up.
Thank you. Ryan, just a question about the debt service coverage without availability charges at 1.0. Is that satisfactory to the rating agencies? If that's okay, given that the range, anticipated range is 174 to 237 during the 5-year period. Is 1.0 okay with them?
That's what we've heard. Yes, their main issue was really that, we do get a lot of money from our availability charges still, since we're growing, and the only policy we had was with availability charges, and so they just noticed that we rely on that, and so you all approved that policy in 2018, and we have not received any negative feedback about it since then.
Great. Okay, thank you.
I have a quick question. So when you look at the projected revenue in the 5-year plan of finance for 2024, there's a big decline from roughly 82 million to 79 million. And it looks like it's just from ERCs. Am I reading that correctly? And if so, why are they all of a sudden taking ERCs down 20% between 23 and 24. Do we have any idea?
That's the county projections. They might will update that as they update that, but I'm assuming that they start to see a significant decrease in growth. I believe their projected build out currently is 2045 in that time frame. So I think you start to see a steady decrease after kind of that time period there.
Okay.
Mr. Koblos has his hand up.
Hi, this may be a silly question, but this is my first time to a finance committee meeting, and I'm so giddy I can't stand it. But the county's ERC projections, I know we've always done that. We base our budgets and everything based on their ERCs, but do they really take into consideration the data center ERCs that we put in? I mean, because there's nothing that, if there's one thing that's going to be growing in the next 5 years, it's the continuing data center areas that we're projecting.
I don't believe so. I would have, but I'm not positive. My understanding is I'm not exactly sure how they come up with their connection numbers. I don't know if anybody else on the call can weigh in, but
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Brian.
no, go ahead.
Yes, actually, no. I mean, what this reflects is residential only. It's not considering commercial or data centers.
That's what I thought.
Right. So, you know, quite frankly, that's worked out great for us right now, because the data centers are what are contributing to your ERCs right now. But no, this does not. We're looking at them. But again, we want to be able to point back to what the county's projecting, and their this does not include that. Thank you.
One other question that is a little bit outside of the box here, but I know Percival's been talking about selling their utility system. Has Loudoun Water been part of any of those discussions with either the county or the towns?
No, not part of that.
Do you anticipate that we may be brought into those discussions?
I don't think on the privatization of the system. No, I don't think so. I mean, we're always thinking ahead that, you know, 20 years from now, you know, is Loudoun Water going to be called in to service some of these towns? And that's always in the back of your mind. But when you have talks about privatization, we're not part of that.
I see.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay, so just a couple of highlights from this slide. As was mentioned, the ERCs do start to trend down and our capital expenditures trend up with those several projects. And so our cash balance steadily decreases, which is why we're currently seeing a bond issuance in 2023. And then this is just the highlights of your coverage tests and the 2 times cash floor. And as you can see, our ending balance for all the 5-year window is above the 2 times cash floor, but that is predicated on us issuing $20 million in debt. And then all the coverage ratios are well above where we need to be. And so the path forward, we always ask for your endorsement of the 5-year plan. And then in December, once the full board adopts the 2021 budget, we'll update this plan and bring it back to you in the first quarter of 2021. So I'm happy to answer any other questions that you all may have.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion that we forward this plan of finance onto the full board with our recommendation for approval.
I'll second.
Doing roll call?
Yes, sir. Mr. Allen,
Yes.
Mr. Byers,
Yes.
Mr. Campbell,
Yes.
And Mr. Kelly.
Yes.
All right, and would that be on action or consent, Mr. Chairman?
That's a good question. Probably consent.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to informational and educational items, the mid-year budget results from Mr. Carnes.
Okay, so this is the mid-year review of 2020. So just a quick agenda, just kind of the background, the process, how we got here, some results, the key indicators, and then the next steps. So the background, you all approved a operating budget with $145 million in expenses this year. The capital spending plan was $73.1 million. Throughout the year, we continue to look for all cost savings opportunities and always exercise prudent financial planning. So the process, we look at everything through June 30th. We evaluated the revenues and projected forward, and then all directors looked at their expense budgets and projected through the end of the year, and then all project managers of all capital projects looked at where they were at June 30 and projected through the end of the year. So some of the results, the operating revenues are expected to be about 99% of budget projections. So we looked at where we were at June 30 and looked historically at what percent of additional revenue we get in the next 6 months. And so based on that, we come up with 99%. Operating expenses are expected to come in below budgets. Non-operating revenues, which is your availability charges and investment income, are right in line with our budget estimates. And then non-operating expenses, which is your interest expense, is expected to come in below budget. And so we have funding available for all expenses through the end of the year. And we use this mid-year review as a jumpstart on creating the 2021 operating budget. So here are some of the numbers for the revenue. So our water looks like we'll be right on budget. Sewage disposal is very close. You can see the other operating revenue is also close as well. So that gets us to 99%. Availability charges are right in line with where we think we're going to be. Investment income, even though we're a little above our projection at mid-year, we've reinvested at much lower rates, as I'm sure you assumed. And so we're not going to get quite above budget. I think we'll be right where we expect to be. So just a couple highlights. User rates did go into effect at January 1st. That was a 3.5% increase. So non-operating revenues, we did budget 2,900. Through June, we were at 1,419, so about 49% of our projection. We went through an extensive exercise of looking at all the projects that we're tracking currently and what their availability charges will be and what quarter within the next 5 years we think they will pay us. And so based on that, we think we're still going to get to our projection this year. That's always subject to change, but that's our best estimate. The interest income is expected to meet projection. Any questions on the revenue? Expenses. Personnel looks like it's going to come in a little under budget. The others are right in line or slightly below where we think we're going to be. It looks like the bottom got cut off there, but it's looking like 97%. Our total expenses will be a little over 140 million, and we budgeted 144.5 million. So that's 97% of our operating budget. Personnel, we've kind of delayed filling vacant positions unless it was really necessary. And then other categories look like they'll be right at or below. Some of the biggest savings we've seen have been in electricity and training and travel. We haven't really done much travel since the first quarter, so we've seen some significant savings there. And depreciation and amortization are right on line, and that's a non-cash expense. So, and then non-operating expenses, which is your interest, is expected to come in below budget. And we've seen a significant savings on our variable rate debt compared to our budget amount. And then the capital expenditure was presented yesterday. That was budgeted at 73.1 million. And it's going to be about 64.5 million through the end of the year, which is between 88 and 89%. And we have the funding available for all of that. So just some of the key indicators, as I mentioned, growth had slowed a little bit. We only had 98 ERCs in July, and we're about 140 so far in August. And 60% of those ERCs have been data center and commercial. August saw that flip a little bit. There's been quite a few residential connections in August. So like I said, we went through an extensive exercise. So even though we were trending down, we think we're going to hit that 2,900. Yes, Mr. Koblis.
Yeah, quick question back to the ERC question I had before.
Mm-hmm.
So do we usually meet the budget for ERCs for residential?
So we started tracking that last year at Mr. Allen's request, and we were a little under. If we took out all the commercial and data centers for the budget last year, we would have just missed. I think our budget last year was 3,000, and we were at 2,800, I think, or so with just residential. So the answer to your question is no. Based on recent experience, without the commercial and data center, we would not hit these budget numbers.
Sometimes that's just a timing issue too. I mean, I think at the end of 2019, we probably saw a bit of a rush to come in because we were raising availability fees on January 1st. And so some of those got made up the year before on the residential side. But we are tracking that now, so we'll be able to keep answering that on an annual basis.
And as you all know, I mean, the economy slowed down, and so we'll continue to monitor that and make any adjustments as needed going forward. And like I said, we always try to save money where we can. So next steps, preparation for the 2021 operating and capital budgets has actually begun. We'll be back to this committee in October to present the operating budget. And then in November, the Joint Finance and CIP Committee will see the capital spending plan. And the full board in December will be asked to approve the 2021 budget. And then once that is approved, we'll take that and put that into the 5-year plan, which we'll update in the first quarter of 2021, and we'll bring that back to you. And with that, I'm happy to answer any additional questions.
Okay. Doesn't seem like there's any questions. So we are on to the quarterly investment review. Mr. Carnes.
Sorry, you have to listen to me a lot this morning. Okay, the quarterly investment review for the quarter ending June 30. Our total portfolio is $294 million. You can see the breakdown of that. Just to note, the liquidity is mostly in the LGIP investment pool. So I'm sure this is not a surprise, but when you compare rates from June 30 of this year to June 30 of last year, they are much, much worse. And so that's just been a steady downward trend, and they haven't really started to tick up much. So we'll just continue to monitor that. But our cash has stayed pretty steady, not much of a decrease, and that's true also so far this quarter. So we had $75 million roll off last quarter, and we reinvested a little over 73 million of that. You can compare the rates, and they're worse. This commercial paper was bought very, very early in the quarter before kind of the bottom fell out. So that's not really indicative of what we were seeing the rest of the quarter. We'll just continue to monitor and invest in the best return we can get. It's still seeming that, at least in the short term, LGIP is pretty competitive with the short term cash needs for us. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Yeah, I have a quick one. Do we really need to be that liquid? 96 million? Is that appropriate? In other words, that's so ultra short, could we be 50, 60 million, or is 90 a comfort level that we have?
So it's a little less than that now. Some of that was, some of it was in cash we got in kind of right at the end of the quarter before we reinvested. But that is something we're evaluating. As you noticed, we do have some capital spending big increases in the next year or two. And like I said, right now, the best rate for that kind of window is LGIP, but we'll continue to monitor that. And if that changes, certainly adjust our strategy.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else have any other questions on the quarterly review? If not, we'll go on to the monthly financial review.
So not much has really changed since the mid-year review, but just a couple highlights. Revenues are still trending in line with what we expect, and expenses are still down from our budget. Like I said, we only had 98 ERCs in July, so that brought us to 1,517. And then at the end of July, our cash was about 293 million. So I'm happy to answer any specific questions you have.
Okay, I don't hear any questions, so that's it. I need next meeting is September 24th, so mark your calendars, Finance Committee, and I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion that we adjourn, Mr. Chairman.
I'll second. Great
Roll
job,
call.
Brian. I just say great job, Brian. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Everyone, a great job.
Mr. Allen,
Yes.
roll call vote
Yes.
for the adjournment of the meeting. Mr. Byers,
Yes.
Mr. Campbell,
Aye.
and Mr. Kelly.
Aye.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.